How you doing, folks? You're watching Onward with Onrie. I'm your host, Kompan, and this week I'm going to be talking about how I made San Diego Comic-Con 2018 my fucking bitch. All right. Now, this show was incredible in the sense that there are just so many people who come to this event. I mean, you're looking at like 150,000 people, if not more, crammed into this convention hall over the span of 4.5 days. It is probably one of the most overwhelming experiences that anybody in the entertainment industry can subject themselves to if they're actually working the show. If you're a fan, think of it this way. You're basically in this freeway of all this information, all this stuff that is just absolutely stimulating to you because you're in this exclusive world, essentially. And you're where everybody wants to be. And today's episode is really kind of targeted at helping you kind of figure out how to build confidence when you're in an environment like this. Because there's so much energy in that convention center, and a lot of it is negative, and I'll get to why. But I think that this is me saying that this is all about me, tooting my own horn, which I will do that too because I fucking earned that right. Really what I want to do is I want to be passing my knowledge on to you so that you can get to the same point. Because I think the one thing I've noticed from being at this show for so many years is that a lot of publishers, creators, everybody who works in this field gets so swept up in all the announcements, all the new things that are being thrown at them that they look at their own work and sort of devalue their own achievements. So I'm going to demystify this convention for you because let me just tell you the truth about San Diego Comic-Con after having done this show for 7 years and selling out at it every single time I've done it. The truth is that this is just a fucking convention, just like any other convention you do. It's not much different than your local convention. In fact, I did 2 conventions back to back. I did Comic-Con in Nebraska, a week prior, and then I came back home and went to San Diego Comic-Con. So I did these 2 shows back to back, and I obviously sold more books at San Diego than I did at Comic-Con. But the one thing I realized about Comic-Con was people are also excited to be there, and when they're picking up my book, they're getting engaged with it the same way they are in San Diego. Therefore, they're the same thing. What am I there to do when I go to conventions? So I'm going to share some experiences with you right now for things that happened to me over the weekend where I basically lost my shit. And I think it's totally normal to lose your shit when you go to these conventions, especially San Diego Comic-Con, especially if you've done 2 shows back to back, which actually, one of my friends was at Comic-Con. He actually also did San Diego Comic-Con last weekend. So he also had that, back-to-back show thing going for him too. A lot of people went through this, and it's extremely overwhelming. So when you're at a convention that's this huge, you have to have control. You have to remember what you're there to do and get the job done. So here's what happened. Thursday, I'm on the floor working. And I started to notice that every time I had a credit card transaction, it wasn't going through. And when I tried to turn on the Wi-Fi, I had to buy the exhibitor internet, which cost $79.99 a day. $79.99 a day. And I wasn't going to pay this. So I called up my phone provider and told them I have a problem, and they reset my internet. Well, then I noticed that the booth I was set up at with Southern California Comics was having problems running credit card transactions too. Then I found out we both have the same phone provider. So I was angry about the situation because I was actually blaming the company Smartline, who provides the internet at these conventions, for the fact that they were purposely blocking out everything so that we would be forced to pay $79.99 per day. Well then, Jamie Newbold, who was on the show last week as a guest, he went to go find out more information. And as soon as he came back, he found out that all the other exhibitors were having the same problem. So then his wife got on the phone with Verizon, who, like I said, was both our providers, and she discovered the problem. She actually had a technician from Verizon come to the convention center and set up a hub with SmartLine, because what was happening was all the cell phone providers were supposed to provide hubs so that they would have increased internet within the convention center. Guess who didn't sign up for that? Verizon. Well, that was suddenly remedied at that convention. So now after that, none of us had internet problems. And I was really impressed with the way Jamie and his wife took care of this. But prior to that happening, we still had to work. I mean, this problem was solved over the course of 2 to 3 hours. It didn't just occur to, it didn't solve itself as quickly as I recapped the story for you. So what happened was in the time when we were trying to figure out the problem, I still had to run credit card transactions, and I had already lost 2 sales. And that really fucking pissed me off, because I don't like, it's hard enough for me to get someone to buy my book. The worst thing is when I have to shut them down and tell them to leave. So, or ask them to come back and, pay with cash when they don't have cash. It's the worst feeling in the world. So when that happened, Jamie had this idea for, until we solve this problem, we're going to call up the store and run our credit card transactions manually. So at that point, it clicked in my head, and I called up my friend Megan, who helped me out at Denver Comic-Con, and I asked her, like, hey, can you run credit card transactions for me manually from home? Because all she really needed was the PayPal app, and then she could manually type in the numbers, and then, there we go. The credit card transaction could go through. And she agreed to help me out. And if it wasn't for her, on Thursday, I would have been totally fucked. So I was able to run credit card transactions again, and everything worked out. And then, obviously, Jamie and his wife solved this problem, and now I had internet again. But I think it's a very important thing to be able to control yourself, because you're going to get angry at this show. I don't care who you are. San Diego Comic-Con will bring out the absolute worst in you. It doesn't matter how good intention, how great your intentions are. The worst will be brought out in you, and I'll get to that too. And it's important to acknowledge that. Okay, that's a second point I want to make here, is that it's okay to get pissed. It's okay to be tired. But then you have to pull yourself away from everything, as hard as it can possibly be, with all the people there, with all the announcements, with all the stuff that's making you feel little and insignificant. It's important to stop and relax. And again, remind yourself what you're there to do and get the job done, right? So, it's just one of those shows that's just going to honestly, feed on you. And I never understood this as an exhibitor. Usually when I go to a convention, I set up, I get my badge, I can walk right through security, get to my table set up, it's easy. Going into work every day is easy for me. I got my coffee, I walk in. If you're an attendee, God, I feel so sorry for you, or God forbid, a professional. The amount of walking you have to do at this show in particular is awful. It just immediately brings out the worst in you. Now, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, the weather was nice in California. There was a nice little cool breeze. It was in the 70s. It was a beautiful day outside. That was all good. Then Saturday comes and it's fucking hot all of a sudden, and there's 10 times more people there than there was before. And it's not hot because there's so many people there, not only because of that, but also because the temperature just went up another 20 degrees. And now it's 90 degrees as opposed to 70. So now everybody's in this convention center, and it's all crowded, and everybody's in a bad mood because they've had to walk from one end of the convention center to the other and back again to wherever they have to go, and they're not walking, they're shuffling, because there's so many goddamn people on this fucking floor, and not just on the floor, outside. I mean, literally, the whole city is just crowded with people. Mike Norton made a really interesting comment a number of years ago. He said, if you dropped an atomic bomb over the San Diego Convention Center, you would destroy the entire entertainment industry. He is 100% right. I mean, every goddamn person is there. I mean, you could be walking around. One year I was on the floor, and I pitched Ron Jeremy. I mean, there he is walking around, and I saw him, and I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to pitch him my book. He didn't buy it, but, point is, you got to go out there and do it. Remember what you're there to do. And, when you're around all these people, you're feeding off of their energy. They're walking down the aisle, and when I'm out there, if I was giving shit away for free, I'd be a fucking hero. Everybody would love me. The second you try and sell something at San Diego Comic-Con, you're a motherfucking asshole, you know? So here I am pitching people, and they're trying to get to where they're going. They're walking like, you know, sardines and everything. And, you know, here I am trying to tell them about my book and trying to get them interested. And a lot of them just walk past because they just can't stop. They're just trying to get to where they're going. But if I stop, then I won't get the sales, and they won't get the book that they secretly want and just don't know it even exists. You know, if I had distribution and I had a big publisher pushing me all the time, hey, I wouldn't have to do this. But my circumstances are a little bit different, and I've learned to live with it, and I love it. So I'm okay with it. In fact, it means so much to me when someone will actually stop and actually hear me pitch, even if they don't buy the book. I had a lot of people say, hey, you know what, don't have the money right now, but I'm really interested. And I give them a bookmark, and who knows, they might buy books. I can tell you this, I sold a couple books while I was actually at the convention through my website, which was kind of cool. So you never know where things could go. And I know that a lot of you know, the other creators who go to these conventions, especially one this size, tend to feel like their work doesn't mean anything. This isn't true, guys. You know, like, don't let that show make you feel worthless, because it's just a fucking show. And it'll happen next year, and guess what? You'll be back there next year. Once you've done this show for like 7 or 8 years, you know you're not going anywhere anymore. You know? And unless you decide that you don't want to go to it anymore for whatever fucking reason, you know? And there are a lot of professionals who are like, nope, I've had my fill of San Diego Comic-Con, I don't need it to further my career, thus I'm not going to it anymore. If you can get to that point, that's great. Why do I go to San Diego Comic-Con every year? Because I make a lot of money when I go and do that show, all right? The volume is there, the amount of people that are there. That's why I'll be back next year. And you know what? I have a great experience, and I learn so much when I go to that convention. I learn an incredible amount, not just from selling Eastern Shin books, but from also, now that I'm a comic book dealer as well, I'm learning from other dealers. The amount of experience that you get from being on the floor, it's incredible. And the amount, and the people you can meet over there, you just never know. You know, like you could be on the floor and pitching a movie producer who might take interest in your work and could make something happen. Now, I'm not holding my breath for that, but you know, there are people who are, and there are people who go to these parties and do that. I think it's important to do you when you go to these shows. You know, stay in that level of comfort, stay in that comfort zone, because when I first started going to San Diego Comic-Con, I thought more was expected of me. And I'm not typically one to go to a lot of networking events where I feel out of place. I go to the networking events when I know that I can meet people who can understand and appreciate the things that I do, and I can reciprocate that. When I go to San Diego Comic-Con's networking events, oftentimes I'm feeling out of place. And you know, I used to go to all these after-hour parties, and I felt out of place at them. So I just changed my crowd. I started hanging out with the other dealers, and you know, having a good time with them, and guess what? Talking shop, learning things that, you know, I didn't know otherwise, things that kind of further my knowledge and my experience within this field. And I think you need to do that too. And you know, I work in this industry at a different capacity than most creators do. Most creators want to find more freelance work. You know, these events are good for that, but you have to understand that you're not going to be the toast of the town. You know, whoever's big at that moment, that's the person who's going to get the most attention. You're just going to be left, you know, you're the small fish, and if you're okay with that, that's okay. You know, the only way to kind of, you got to start somewhere when you're climbing the ladder. So it's all good, but I think it's important to find your place, and don't feel like you need to go outside of your comfort zone in that realm, because you're only going to be disappointed in yourself if you do that. Learn where your strengths are, and then learn how to make yourself even stronger, you know, from that. And if eventually something does bring you to these networking events, hey, that's great. Another reason why I don't typically go to the big parties and everything like that is because it never leads to work for me. You know, like, I have a couple drinks, I spend a lot of money, I talk to a few people, nothing ever comes of it. So why would I keep doing it? That's not to say you shouldn't do it. Just find what works for you when you're doing these shows, you know, and just understand it's another convention. You're going to see these same assholes at the next one, you know, so if you choose to change your mind at some point, it's no big deal. All right? And this brings me to my last point, guys. Remember who you are. There is nobody else in this entire field that is as good at what you do as you. All right? Let that sink in. Because whatever your project is, only you can bring it to life. Only you can give it the attention to detail and tell the story the way you envision it, because you are the architect of everything. It lives and dies with you. You don't have to worry about what everybody else is announcing and what all the other big things is. Because here's the bottom line. Even though there's all these announcements at Comic-Con, they're just announcements. There's no sales being generated from it. There's no money being made over there. It's actually money being spent, if you think about it. The amount of advertising that goes into this convention is astronomical. I mean, literally, the city shuts down for Comic-Con because everybody wants to advertise over there. That's how the city survives, essentially, is they make a shit ton of money from this convention. And they welcome it. At San Diego Comic-Con, the way it's been built over the years has been great for the city. It's put it on the map, essentially. It's the biggest convention out there. So just remember that. The people who are at these shows promoting and doing all this stuff, they're working and they're exhausted. And, you know, they're hoping that all the attention, all the eyes is going to lead to sales for them. But here's where I learned to make this show my bitch. I didn't need to advertise. I didn't need to do anything. If you saw my space at that show, it was 2 feet of space. I didn't have this. I had nothing. I just had this, and that's it. I just had me out there slinging books with bookmarks, all right? And when you do that, when you have that will, and you keep yourself focused on who you are and what you're there to do, you cannot be defeated. And that's what, I mean, Sunday, I was exhausted at this point, all right? I'd been on the floor for 3.5 days. And here I am now. I'm like, you know, my feet were killing me. My feet were on fire because I was wearing these heavy shoes that were like hot. And like, you know, I had socks in them, but I have to wear these shoes because that's the only way I can stand for so many hours. I mean, these are orthopedic shoes, right? So I'm agitated. I'm tired. I don't want to be around anybody, you know. And when people reject me, sometimes it can be really cruel, you know. Like sometimes people can look at my book and say, "Hey, is it free?" and then walk away. Other times people will be like, "Nah, this isn't cool. I don't want to hear about this." And other times, I had one lady come up to me, and she said, "I was just at a panel about historical comics, and we were all discussing whether or not there was a market for historical comics. And don't think I didn't want to bitch slap her. I just sold 84,000 books. What the fuck is there no market? You know, I'm fucking building the goddamn market. There is a fucking market. There will always be a market for a good story. And that's what you have to remind yourself. All right? It doesn't matter what anybody tells you. If you come up with a great idea for a fucking superhero story and everybody tells you it doesn't work and whatever, you know, figure out how to make it work. You know, that nothing's impossible. You can solve the problem." And at that point, after she said that and walked off, I was like, you know what? It's time for me to show these people who I am. And I got myself really calm, and I just kept going at it. I kept going at it, and then eventually I sold the fuck out at that show, and I'm going to sell out at the next show I go to. Because I have that mindset. I know I can do this. And you guys can do this too. You have to believe yourself. Find that center of confidence for yourself and build off of that. All right? Okay, guys, I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Until then, onward to victory.